together, and then an exorbitant amount of superiority, a complex of the people who think that they really truly won and they can do anything they want to other people, be it people of color or different religions, be it Muslim, be it Native. I think that the people who have found each other need to hold fast and stay connected and front that fear and front that hate with what you know in your breath to be nothing but love. And it sounds so hippy-dippy, organic, or even new agey, but you have to fight that fear and that hate with the other four-letter word, which is love. And what does that look like? Let's talk about what's happening right now at Standing Rock. We just got a report before we came here to bring the hate and the fear real. There were about 22,000 people watching this live feed video, and by the time we parked the car, it was 38,000 people watching this video. Right now, as we speak, there are a couple thousand people blocking the road at 1806 highway to prevent the trucks going forward through the bridge. And I don't know if they've occupied the bridge in its proximity to this road, but right now the authorities, Morton County Sheriff, Police, and ICE have shot into the crowds with rubber bullets, tear gas, and water cannons. And it's 20 degrees and descending, getting closer. So as my brother here offered as he was driving, gasping, he says, that's hypothermia. And it is. And we have reached the place and time where there is chemical warfare, because tonight, as we go back home to sleep, they will spray again, as they have been for the last 3 weeks, if not a little bit longer. They will spray with the dust cropping planes, chemicals in the night on the people who are protecting the water for 17 million people. So there's that fear, there's that hate, and there's profit in that for a select few. And so what are they doing? The people there that are being brutally tortured and brutally treated are meeting it with love. They're unarmed. They have prayer. They have each other. And I think that's symbolic of what we have to face, post his inauguration. And we can talk about that further. But looking to how it's a different day when we rise. We have to own our day. We have to share our day. And we have to actually look to purge what once was and look forward to the ideal of meeting that fear and that hate with love, whatever we have, and share whatever we have. And for me, it means a lot more than being ruled and governed by papers, because when I first started, I said that I'm not recognized federally or state as a Native person. Well, right now we have papers that are ruling and documenting our lives and keeping track of where we are and what we do with, be it taxes or rent or contracts or agreements. We have to start really thinking about what does that mean a year from now. We have to really start making a 180-degree shift and change in our commitments to ourselves and how we live our days. And lastly, what I'd like to say is that with the reinvention of ourselves, as it's just not business as usual, it can't be business as usual. So there are many of us who are working in many circles, and we're trying to pull back our money from the major banks, B of A, Wells Fargo, Citi, and all of that. We're asking people to join credit unions. We're asking people to go outside themselves and say, yes, I'll commit to going to city council meetings or even to other city governing meetings. We have to go there, and we have to maybe take 1 to 3 minutes of public commentary to put it on the record. Because in that shift in dynamics of our money and our power with our money, we also have to put people on notice that they work for us. And the minute we stop and take over some of these meetings and facing their fear of us and their hate of us, that we actually want the same thing. We want to live a healthy, happy life. And if we have children or grandchildren, we want them to forge a future that's not it's uncertain, but it's actually going to yield some opportunities, some really strong, good, healthy opportunities, not being chemically sprayed in the middle of the night and being policed into detentions or shipped away somewhere far away from us. And the last thing is that while it's worth it, call the White House every day, ask to free the political prisoners, Mumiabul Jamal, Leonard Peltier, and so many others. Do write letters and send emails. It feels better to be part of the process now that needs to crumble, and the pieces and parts that we need to keep that actually work is simply communication, meetings like this, bringing other people with us to meetings like this, and making sure that when you leave meetings like this, that it's not just yet another meeting, that we actually forge that connection and hold fast to each other, because we're saying that Standing Rock is everywhere, and there are future ruin of our environment within a couple of miles from here at the coastal beach. We have a right to that public space. It's sacred to some of us Native people, and that's where we pray. And at the same time, whatever holds sacred to you should be respected and should be held and revered and important to you, that people like us should show up when it's being challenged, and that's the connection. We have to really purge the idea of what we were comfortable with yesterday, because today's just something new. It's just something new, and I don't want to live in the space of fear or hate. I'd rather err on the side of love and connect with people. And last of all, we're receiving runners tomorrow, and that's what our elders do. They drop these things at us within 9 days or 4 days of an actual event. So we scramble and we make the most of it. We have Chief Honorable Looking Horse coming to the north side of the pier, and we're going to receive him and the delegation of runners who ran from Standing Rock to Washington, D.C. to deliver a message to Obama about the DAPL, about the Dakota Access Pipeline. And it's at 3 o'clock tomorrow on the north side of the pier, and we would love to have you there, because we're meeting fear and hate tomorrow at 3 o'clock with our love and our compassion and our connection to each other. And that's about all I have to say right now, and I'll probably weigh in a little bit more. And I'm a little bit shaken because, it's something to see in the dark, thousands of people and the water just shooting. And one of our elders, our director for AIM, American Indian Movement, said he was shot with water, and he's okay. He had some of the tear gas, but he's okay. He wasn't shot with a rubber bullet, or he's thankful he wasn't arrested. So, I mean, how do we measure our sense of freedom or our happiness by not being arrested, by protecting water for 17 million people? This is not the America, the land that I grew up in, what I was taught to love and revere. I'm more digging the people that I'm meeting than I am my entire education that I received in this country. So, and I thank you.
All right. So we're here to talk about what has happened. This supposed shift in the political atmosphere that has elicited people coming out and not knowing what they want to do, but knowing that they're confronting some sort of power that is taken hold of what they perceive as America. Their perception of America being the American dream, the land of opportunity, the melting pot, all the things that human beings positively connect to, diversity, community. And I think that we're seeing a complete cognitive dissonance within the citizenry of the population of this nation, coming to terms with what they believe they represent and what they actually express through capitalism, through the system, and we're not alone, but the capitalist system has been for decades now the U.S. has been at the forefront of pushing this. They've been a leader in creating the capitalist global system that we have now. So what I guess I see and through my interpretation through studying what Marx has taught through dialectics and understanding relationships and how things are interacting with the system, that nothing really has changed in how America has always expressed itself. America, from its foundation, has expressed itself with white supremacy. It was founded before it became America through the genocide of indigenous people through North and South America. It was fortified through the competitive nature of colonialism through Western powers. It was created in its wealth was amassed through massive amounts of slavery, first here and then through the 19th and 20th century through our own colonialism that we expressed through the world. And now we are at the precipice of U.S. imperialism and global imperialism pushing up against the finite nature of our planet, which, but in any regard, what I see is a dialectical expression of capitalism, that Trump is not something new, but it is an expression, is a symptom, is that it is natural in this expression of capitalism. I think that if you look at how neoliberalism expresses itself and has developed in the past decades, that it's focused on deregulating and creating a free market that can produce the goods for everyone. Well, obviously that's not true, because the goods are only supplied to privileged communities. They are taken and extracted and through the resources and through labor globally, and that specifically with neoliberalism, the merger of corporate and state power that we see through revolving door operations, one person being a CEO and the next minute being a state representative, is completely natural to progress to fascism or neo-fascism. That neoliberalism, I think, is a euphemistic term for neo-fascism. That we already have been seeing that progression of state and corporate collusion expressed completely, and that Trump is a completion, or I think a stamp on what America has always naturally expressed throughout its entire existence. As a person who's experienced, I come from a very strange experience. I've experienced Islamophobia for the majority of my life. I'm lucky to have this beautiful porcelain skin to hide behind. In my adult life, if I shut up and don't speak my name, I can get away with a lot of stuff in the society. But from my childhood, from the day I was born, I grew up fearing that my family would be annihilated in Iran every day. I was born in 1980. The revolution started in 1979. and the Islamic State was founded then and immediately was an enemy of the state, whereas the year before, Iran was one of the greatest, allies of the U.S. I don't fear anymore for my family or for my life or for, if my dad was still here, his life, because I experienced Islamophobia since I was a child. White kids, I'm not going to go into, the language used, but it wasn't a pretty experience. Authority figures would harass my father when I was old enough to drive. Authority figures would immediately treat me differently once they saw my identification. I've been detained, through security measures at airports repeatedly after 9/11, and they're always very surprised to see my face. I'm assuming they were expecting something a little darker. But I don't personally feel anything that has changed with how this country expresses itself. Trump expresses white supremacy. America expresses white supremacy. I don't see how there's any difference. The only difference I see is that our expression of white supremacy is coming into communities that have had a cognitive dissonance of those expressions, that they've paid their taxes, they've been apathetic to those processes of global imperialism, that when the kids in Gaza and Yemen get blown up by bombs, there are people running in the streets. I mean, there are some people, but not to the extent that we see eliciting this spontaneous upsurge of fear and activism that Trump is creating. There's no difference between what he's talking about and what we've been expressing throughout through my entire life and through the life of the United States. He's expressing what we've been doing. We have deported more immigrants under the Obama administration than any other presidency. We don't need a wall. We got the desert. We take the water out of the desert. The kids, the mothers, the people, they die. We have border control. We don't need a wall. The Muslim population here has already experienced discrimination for decades. It's been heightened through the several Iraq wars. When I was a kid, it was you're Saddam Hussein's nephew. Now it's you're Bin Laden's nephew, or you're part of ISIS. Nothing has changed. That anger may be legitimized in certain communities by seeing a political apparatus that supports their fears, but I don't think the expression we're experiencing right now should be held in some sort of special way. It's American as apple pie, as Lisa said earlier today. And I think to make this active, I guess, to focus on Trump really distracts us and puts energy into places that won't move as in movement building. I think the political structure inherently, the way it's set up, expresses white supremacism. I mean, the fact that the Democratic Party, which is supposedly the working class party in the American conscious or unconscious, however you want to frame it, that party is supposed to be supporting workers and people, but they don't. They use rhetoric and propaganda to create a base, for that base to support political action, policy, and execution that is totally against their interests. And they've been doing it for decades. So I think that, we need to really look at how we engage in the political apparatus. I'm not saying that people shouldn't be running for office or pressuring offices, but really understanding what that political identity is right now. Whatever you want it to be, if you want people to get engaged and take over the political apparatus, great. But we have to understand right now that the politics from the city level to the federal level expresses white supremacy. It expresses it when it gentrifies neighborhoods. It expresses it when it kills black people in the streets disproportionately. It expresses it when it incarcerates black and brown people to do free labor for the capitalist system. It expresses it over its seas by murdering black and brown people wherever to exploit and capitalize on resources. So I think as we venture forward from this point in history, we have to recognize the fear that people have from this position, and we have to educate them and first listen to what they have to say and why they're afraid. And then we have to, as Marxists and human beings that understand that we're facing a systemic crisis that is creating a climate crisis, that created a climate crisis that we're experiencing at this present moment, that we need to forge an education that develops an understanding of our abstract political socioeconomic system applied to our physical material system and to our emotional and spiritual systems that we engage in as well. That's it.
If you came in late, I'm Kevin Anderson, I'm our last speaker, and my talk actually has a title, and this is actually the draft of an article I'm thinking of publishing, so I'm interested in getting people's comments because I'm probably going to revise it tonight or tomorrow morning and get it out there. It's entitled The Trump Election, Mourn, Reflect, and Organize. The old wobbly slogan says, don't mourn, organize, but I would like to amend that to say that we should mourn the fateful events of November 8th, but not for too long. Then we need to reflect theoretically and organize in response to the monstrous reality we're now facing. Here's one way to think about the shock of Trump's victory. By last summer, it was clear that Trump had stirred up some dangerous forces in U.S. society, that even if he lost, this poisonous legacy was now out there facing us. I mean, not entirely new, of course, as Hamid was saying. But at the same time, it seemed more like a long-term challenge, that the wolf was over the next mountain. It turned out that the wolf was much closer and has now broken into our home. We have no choice but to fight. So what do we face now? I mean, most of this is familiar to most of the people here, but still, when you put it all together, I think it's good to consider it all together. As Hegel says, we need to stare negativity in the face, not face away from it. Show up at meetings like this, as opposed to meetings about our great victories only. One, Trump will have his hand, I think it's the most significant. It's not talked about that much. Trump will have his hand on the nuclear button with power to blow up the world, that decision entirely his own. 5 minutes. 2, Trump will have the power to issue executive orders reversing Obama's mild immigration reforms and to order mass deportations, again without consulting anyone. 3, Trump has already designated a neo-fascist Steve Bannon as his chief political strategist based in the White House, something he can also do unilaterally. 4, Trump has already designated Islamophobe General Michael Flynn as National Security Advisor, which he can also do unilaterally. 5, Trump is going to nominate the virulently anti-immigrant senator from Alabama, the good old boy Jefferson, and we know who his mother was naming him for with that first name, Jefferson Sessions, as Attorney General, a man who was denied a federal judgeship because of his viciously anti-black words and actions. 6, that's by Republicans, denied of that. 6, Trump has announced that he will defund Planned Parenthood and take other measures against women's rights, something the Republicans, who will now control both the House and the Senate, have been itching to do for years. 7, Trump has announced he will put the environment-destroying Keystone Pipeline back on track, something he can do by the stroke of a pen. 7, Trump and the Senate will be able to place their person on the Supreme Court, likely for decades to come, although there could be possibly a way to stop it. Protesting Trump's victory. Since November 9th, large and angry protest demonstrations have occurred from coast to coast and internationally as well. Some of the U.S.'s most oppressed and marginalized youth, Latino high school students in East LA, staged a massive walkout earlier this week, marching on downtown LA. In those same days, and at the other end of the socioeconomic scale, the actors in the audience at the very pricey Broadway play Hamilton staged a protest against Vice President-elect Mike Pence when he attended a performance. Some are emphasizing that Hillary Clinton actually won over 2 million votes more than Trump. That's what they think it's going to turn out to. But that the 18th century U.S. Constitution allows totals to be tallied state by state in a way that thwarts majority rule. While that is true, it will not prevent Trump and the Republicans from moving forward very quickly on their agenda. Recall that for most of U.S. history, until 1965, the black population of the South was enslaved, and then after the brief Reconstruction period, after the Civil War, forcibly disenfranchised. The fact that Southern Democrats of the same ilk as Republicans today did not hesitate to use legal means to restrict black voting and thus achieve their own domination in states where blacks were the vast majority, like Mississippi. However, the fact that Trump decisively lost the popular vote could be a significant mobilizing tool against him. It will call more attention to the undemocratic and authoritarian character of his impending administration. Reasons behind Trump's victory: racism, misogyny, and nativism. How could a man who publicly degrades women, especially his opponents, who expresses open contempt for black people, who denies global warming, and who was a blatant Islamophobe, have been elected even under the rigged electoral college system and the voter suppression and so forth? Some have argued that Trump's election signifies the pendulum swinging toward reaction, just as it did after other times that blacks made significant social progress, as seen in the post-Reconstruction politics of the 1880s, or the reaction to the 1960s exemplified by the election of Richard Nixon in 1968. There are two flaws to this argument, however. One is the assumption that significant progress for African Americans occurred under the Obama administration. In fact, the Obama period did not see any major advances for black people, certainly not economically, nor were African Americans imprisoned at significantly lower rates. And most of all, the murders of black people that sparked the Black Lives Matter movement saw no abatement under Obama. The second flaw revolves around the assumption that Trump stirred up atavistic hatreds among white people, especially white workers, thus bringing about Clinton's defeat. In short, that racism works. But this belies the fact that the Republican Party has been race baiting for 5 decades, even as the population has shifted, becoming less white, and lost decisively in the 2 previous presidential elections for its trouble, even though by 2012 it had added immigrant bashing to the old staple of race baiting. Trump, of course, took race baiting and immigrant bashing to new heights, but the so-called moderate, Mitt Romney, maybe that's why they were meeting, it's like a link they have, don't remember that he won his nomination by outflanking none other than Newt Gingrich in the field of immigrant bashing. Remember, he said, "I believe in self-deportation," and Gingrich is too soft. What Trump added to that mix, besides the open rather than veiled appeal to such hatreds, those Mexican so-called rapists and criminals coming across the border, were 2 new elements. One, he employed virulent Islamophobia as expressed in the bizarre notion of banning Muslims from coming to the U.S., around which he stoked fear of ISIS terrorist attacks. This, as opposed to immigrant bashing at a more general level, was certainly something new, which he tried to link to immigrants as a whole. 2, Trump exhibited an equally virulent misogyny, directed primarily at Clinton, the first woman candidate of a major political party. This, too, was not entirely new for Republicans, except for the virulence, and this, too, may have garnered him some success, despite the ways in which it outraged large sectors of the population, both women and men, especially the youth. The end of neoliberalism, with a question mark. But the decisive factor in Trump's victory, and the aspect of his politics that is most dangerous for the future, in terms of widening the appeal of reactionary politics, and why I think he won, concerns his nationalist, isolationist, America First politics. Attacking so-called free trade deals like NAFTA, he poses a champion of workers in the relatively high-wage coal mining, auto, and steel sectors. Also, unlike previous Republican candidates going all the way back to Reagan, he generally declined to attack the minimum wage, and he also promised not to touch core elements of the social safety net like Social Security and Medicare. This drew a wedge into the Democrats' already weak support base among industrial workers and others in areas that were or had been centers of high-wage industry. This took not only the form of votes for Trump, but also stoked low turnout among her extensible supporters, as Clinton, while tacking slightly to the left compared to her earlier politics, did things like holding fundraisers with wealthy bankers and Hollywood people, even as her opponent was class-angling his appeal. It did not help either that she and Obama campaigned, like Herbert Hoover, on the notion that the economy was basically sound, when tens of millions of working people have seen their incomes stagnate or decline while wealth concentrates ever more at the top. It is this economic populist element that made Trump's electoral college win something entirely new. At least at a political level, it seems to signal nothing less than the end of the neoliberal era, at least in terms of political rhetoric and ideology. This becomes even clearer when Trump's surprising victory is seen alongside the vote for Brexit in the UK, the Orban regime in Hungary, and the increasing popularity of other right-wing movements in Europe and elsewhere. And of course, all these movements express their anti-neoliberalism in racist, anti-immigrant, Islamophobic, and sometimes in misogynist terms as well. As Peter Humanist wrote in his analysis of the election that has been voted a statement of our organization, and that's this thing out here which everybody should get before they leave, Trump's victory certainly shows that right-wing opponents of neoliberalism have found a way to speak to disaffected segments of the working class by draping their critique of neoliberalism in racism and misogynist terms. What is to be done? Where does this leave the left? I'm talking about the left, not the liberals, not the trade union, but the left. As also noted by Humanist in our statement, this means that the left, which is concentrated on the opposition to neoliberalism for the past 2 decades, think people like David Harvey, has been outflanked on the right. To the IMHO, this means that we need to rethink our opposition to capitalism and how we pose it in order to make clearer than ever that we are targeting capitalism as such, not only neoliberalism. As part of that, we on the left need to find ways to reach out to white workers, but without any concessions on issues like Black Lives Matter, revolutionary feminism, LGBT issues, environmental justice, defense of immigrants, opposition to Islamophobia, and so forth. This is not impossible, but it is a hard road nonetheless. Recall that at several turning points in our history, U.S. working people have in fact united across racial lines and sustained movements for radical change. Among them, the left-wing populist movement of the 1890s in southern states, talking about southern white working people, rural working people aligned with blacks, the industrial union movement of the 1930s, or the rank-and-file auto workers' strikes and plant occupations of the 1970s, which had been preceded by a black workers' movement but became a more generalized rank-and-file workers' movement by the early 1970s. One thing we don't want to do as we battle Trump is to fall into the mistake of Clinton, however, bashing Trump for good reason but without offering a positive humanist and yet possible vision for the future. This problem is not limited to liberals, however. It has been endemic to the left as well and for decades. As Raya, the founder of Marxist humanism in the U.S., wrote in the aftermath of the 1960s, quote, "Without such a vision of new revolutions, a new individual, a new universal, a new society, new human relations, and without a philosophy of revolution," this is the key phrase, "activism spends itself in mere anti-imperialism and anti-capitalism without ever revealing what it is for." Thus, what we need is Marxist humanists to push the left and the opposition to Trump to move from anti-neoliberalism to anti-capitalism. Even a principled anti-capitalism that makes no concessions to racism, sexism, and nationalism will not be enough without a positive and possible vision of the future. And elaborating that vision has to start with Marx himself, with his concept of a society free of exploitation and alienation, one of free and associated labor in an economy based on production for use, not value production, and aiming toward the lofty goal of each according to their abilities, to each according to their needs. In his last years, as Marx developed these ideas more concretely, among the models he was looking at were the modern working class communism of the Paris Commune of 1871 and the indigenous communism of the Iroquois nation. I'd just like to leave it there. I don't have any more conclusion than that at this point. Thank you.
All right. We're going to take about a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back for discussion. If you haven't had a chance, check out the table.